Today, I'll take you on an adventure to the top of Africa on a climb at Kilimanjaro, and I'll also talk a little bit more about a tabletop tripod that I introduced that got a lot of questions, as well as using Foolography's Unleashed with the Z6 II and Z7 II. Well, hi everybody. It's time to make a little shift from just talking about gear and technique to going on an adventure. You know, I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, what really drew me into photography in the first place was going out on adventures in the world and sharing the things that I saw with the people back home. You know, when I started doing big adventures and traveling, I had an elderly grandmother who had an adventurous spirit and couldn't really leave the confines of her home in her home city. And so I loved going out on adventures and bringing back images to sort of tell the adventures that I've been on. One of the biggest adventures I went on was my first trip to Africa. I literally had just kind of jumped out of practicing law and into doing photography first time or full time. And I had this vision of going and climbing Kilimanjaro before the snows were all gone and the glaciers were all gone up there. And going on safari and traveling to see mountain gorillas and going on an island adventure in Zanzibar. And instead of finding a guide to book that all from my home here, I literally booked a hotel room in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, flew in and figured it all out on the ground. And I'll take you along on that adventure today, as well as go back 13 years ago, or even 14 years ago, I think it was 2007 I took this trip, and re-edit one of my favorite RAW files from that trip to kind of show you my workflow and how my editing has improved since 2007 and the software that we use to do it. And I'll also come back and talk a little bit about a tripod that I introduced a couple weeks ago in Approaching the Scene, and the head, there's a little amazing miniature ball head that goes with this Leo photo set of legs, and I'll show you that you can buy those two individually. A lot of people ask me about this crazy little ball head that's attached to this tabletop tripod. So I'll talk about that, as well as using the Unleashed from Foolography with the Z6 II and Z7 II. So stick around for the end for that. Again, you know, all the content is chaptered out if you scroll along the timeline at the bottom of the video, or you can jump into the video's description and you'll find a table of contents with linked time codes, as well as links to everything that I'm talking about. There's not that much I'm talking about today, but I've got affiliate links to purchase the Unleashed and the tabletop tripod and the head. And a number of other things, as well as affiliate links to all of the gear that I use, which are constantly updated, and I appreciate your guys using those. Those help me out. All right, so, you know, let's not talk that much more. Let's just jump in. Let's go to Kilimanjaro. All right, so Kilimanjaro. I think, you know, if you've followed me long enough, you know that I kind of came up with photography from my absolute passion for adventure, for travel, for climbing. And Kilimanjaro kind of loomed large in my mind, particularly when I was working as an attorney in a law firm and sort of dreaming of adventure and, you know, focused on the environment. I was an environmental lawyer and thinking about the ice that was shrinking from Kilimanjaro and just wanted to get up there and have this adventure, tour Africa. I had never been there. And so, you know, I think one of the really exciting things, I really wanted to go and not even have a plan, you know, just figure it out once I got there. So I remember I traveled in, flew in on a plane, and had the first night booked in Dar es Salaam, and that was sort of it. Dar es Salaam is the biggest city in Tanzania. I had a friend named Baraka who I'd been communicating with. A family that I knew here in Oregon had sponsored Baraka as a young man. He'd become a safari guide, and I started communicating with him. And over the correspondence, I kind of made friends, and he said, you know, come to Arusha. That's where he was working as a guide. And I'll take some time off, and I'll show you around. I said, come climb Kilimanjaro with me. And he took a leave of absence. He was working at a kind of high-end safari camp in Serengeti. And he took time off. He met me when I got into Arusha and and helped me run around, find guides, find the people I needed to find. And on my way on the bus, I met up with this really cool New Yorker named Adam Margolin, who has been a friend ever since. I haven't talked to him for a while, but whenever I go to Manhattan, I link up with Adam. And he was on this kind of soul-searching world tour. He'd been traveling for months. He was trying to live on like $10 a day and travel the world. And he'd been all through Asia and was traveling through Africa. And he wanted to climb Kilimanjaro too. I literally met him on the bus from Dar es Salaam to Arusha. I like to think of Arusha as kind of like Mos Eisley. It's this in Star Wars, for the Star Wars fanatics, it's this place where all the guides and the people who want to go on adventures are linking up and making negotiations to figure out, how to get where they want to go and have the adventure that they want to have. So on the bus, we started hatching a plan. We'll figure out, how to climb Kilimanjaro. I met up with Baraka, and we literally started talking with guides. And then Adam was staying at a hostel and met up with Oliver and Genevieve, who are from Montreal in Canada. They wanted to climb Kilimanjaro. You start kind of linking up with people. There's Baraka in the background. We linked up with some guides, Paul and Michael and their cook Gideon and a whole group of amazing porters. We hired those guys. Gideon was an awesome cook. These are the kinds of meals that we ate in the tent on the way. Stewed vegetables and potatoes and chicken, and here I am back in the day. Now remember, this is way back in 2007. So you have to kind of give some of my photos a little bit of an apology. I was not the photographer, I am today. And I hope, 13 years from now, I'll look back at the photos I'm taking now and say I'm not the photographer or I wasn't the photographer that I am today 13 years from now. Let's hope. Hope we're always traveling forward. Let's hope I also have better taste in sunglasses and that my beard is still bigger and fuller. So you start up traveling through this amazing deep forest. You're going to spend, I think we spent 9 days on the mountain. You start in the low forest, you climb up a little ways, you spend the night. Remember, this is a 19,000 foot mountain. So part of the journey is traveling across the mountain through all of its biomes, staying at different elevations, going up a little higher each day, traveling back down, acclimatizing. But the forest is just amazing, and it's filled with beautiful flowers and wildlife, monkeys, creatures, and these are tree ferns. These are literally some of the biggest ferns in the world. There's Adam standing under them. There's tiny, beautiful flowers, and then you pop out of the forest and you start getting views of this massive mountain that you're embarking on, and just kind of the grueling terrain between you and the upper mountain. These are the kind of tents that we stayed in. This is the kind of amazing, colorful gear that our porters and guides were wearing to stay warm in the cold nights. You get up above tree line and you start finding, all kinds of new vegetation and creatures. These are Indian ravens, beautiful little songbirds. There's glaciers and snow and ice. Totally different than the Cascade Mountains that I grew up climbing, and some of the South American mountains that I had climbed before down in Peru. And here's a view, my first kind of full view of this giant buttress of a mountain. That's Kilimanjaro proper, from up above tree line on our way up. The weather was constantly changing. You get these just spectacular views. And looking back across towards Arusha, you see Mount Meru, which I actually traveled back to some years later. I've spent a number of trips in Africa, and one of my absolute favorite journeys, a completely different journey than Kilimanjaro, was climbing Mount Meru. Now, obviously, Kilimanjaro is your view from Mount Meru. There's almost no one climbing it. The wildlife is richer and thicker, and there's less people. It's a less traveled path. Maybe I'll do another slideshow of that if people have interest. But this was a beautiful night. I love the gradient from gold to blue in this image. Here's our guide Paul chilling it. I was always just impressed with the guides and the porters and just how upbeat they were, despite the fact that they're carrying so much gear and working so hard. Most of the people on the mountain are carrying just light day packs with a snack and some waterproof layers and a few warmer layers. You're traveling through rough terrain, but the guides and the porters are carrying so much for you. I loaded myself with camera gear and insisted on carrying a lot of lenses and camera gear and a tripod, but at the same time, I'm not carrying my tent, my sleeping bag, all that stuff. It's rocky, beautiful mountain terrain. You know, you are on a big volcano, but the vegetation is so incredible. This is a giant senecio tree. These are baby senecios, you know, just wild, insane vegetation, and constantly watching the porters, both with our group and with other groups, and thinking about just how tough these guys are. You know, their life is a far less glamorous than you might think. Here's our assistant guide, Michael, and I'm just like, how can you smoke and do this job? Here's the latrines in the camps where you stay. I won't linger on this image, but it gives you a little view into the fact that it's not all beauty out there. Luckily, there's a couple 2x6s to stand on. Here's Gideon working in the cook tent. You know, the weather was bad at times. This is an image I'm going to jump back at the end of this little tour, and I'm going to rework this. This is kind of how I edited it 14 years ago. And I'll take you through my process today and see how we come out differently, this image from back then and now at the end of this process. So this was actually my favorite camp. This was my favorite night. This is really sort of my favorite landscape image of Kilimanjaro because it shows the insane vegetation and the glaciers, and it was a beautiful night with a cloudscape, and it was blue hour after sunset. Here's what's called the breakfast trail. Now, that's not all our group. That's a number of groups that are going up, but it's like, I don't remember. I mean, I'm going to guess it was like 200 switchbacks up out of this beautiful camp, the Great Barranco camp. And you're just going up switchbacks towards the upper mountain nonstop. And these porters are carrying so much. I mean, here's Oliver and Genevieve with our guide Paul. We're coming on up. Here's some of our guys and Gideon coming up with all the food. I mean, just we're high above the clouds. We're up probably at, I don't know, 15,000 feet here. And they're carrying so much. Some of them are wearing flip-flops. It's just incredible. The vegetation. I couldn't stop photographing these crazy plants close up. Here's a rare shot of me. You know, usually the photographer is never photographed, but behind the camera, that's me working. You can kind of see how I'm traveling there. You know, I've got some of my standard Cascade mountaineering gear, some soft shell pants and a lightweight fleece, and I've got warmer layers in my backpack and some lenses, and I'm chest carrying a camera holster. I was shooting with the D700 back then, and I think that's probably my Zeiss 35mm I'm working with. Here's our high camp. This is a dry camp. I can't remember the name of it, Mwanza or Mwenze, but it's a dry, cold camp up around 16,000 feet. You spend the night up here. There's no water. The porters have to carry all the water that you need. And you get up at midnight and you start for the summit. You got, 3,000, several hundred feet to get up to the summit through rocky, rough, dry terrain. And you start dead at midnight. So I can't remember this guy's name, but man, I loved his outfit. And it was funny, we were constantly kind of joking about how awesome his hat was. And he was not on the summit crew, and it was so sweet. Remember this hat? I remember he was good friends with my New York buddy Adam, and I'll tell you in a second here. So here's midnight. This is a 30-second exposure of another camp. We weren't with Tusker. Tusker's a big organized group, but I liked the way their camp looked from our camp with the mountain up above, and I did a 30-second exposure just to get these stars as sharp as I could with the glaciers up above. This is as we took off, and here's Adam wearing that porter's cap. That porter was like, "You should take my cap. You don't have a warm hat." And he sent Adam with that hat for the summit. Here we all are in the dark, following our guide who's done this multiple times before, watching as the sun is coming up. I was just racing for the summit with my tripod and my camera. I wanted to see the crater rim at dawn, and it was, we're going up to 18,500 feet. We're not far from the summit. Beautiful day. We've got the weather. I will say that in the middle of the night, I was following Baraka. Baraka has never even been up in the cold. He's a Tanzanian local guide. He'd never dreamed of climbing Kilimanjaro, and there was a moment where I started talking to him, and he just went completely quiet on me, and I thought, Baraka. And he was still walking, but he was sort of semi-catatonic walking, and I realized he did not have enough food. And I had all these goos like an energy gel. It's just pure carbohydrates and sugar. And when it's sort of like it's like a goo. It's basically like cake frosting, and you squeeze these packets out into your mouth. And I used them mountain biking all the time. If you or a friend seems like you're crashing because you don't have enough sugar in your bloodstream, you just pop one of these and it hits you quick. And I remember making Baraka eat 2 of these things and then a Cliff Bar, and forcing him to drink some water, and all of a sudden he started talking. He's like, I'm okay, I'm okay. And I really thought I was willing to turn back with him. He was such an amazing friend. But he's kept going, and we made it to the crater rim at dawn. And I took this photo of the crater rim. Now the summit of Kilimanjaro is clear over here, which is like a mile and a half away. Once you get up onto that crater rim, you have to keep walking this rim trail, and you're brutally cold, and it's, at 19,000 feet, so there's not much oxygen. There's Baraka, recovered. He's such a great guy. Here is those receding glaciers of Kilimanjaro. I can't wait to get back. I really want to go back with my kids when they're big enough, and see this before it's completely gone. Here's Oliver and Genevieve and Baraka with Michael following up, our assistant guide. Look how far the clouds are below us. We're up above those last glaciers of Kilimanjaro. And there I am with Gideon on the summit, Uhuru Peak. A really triumphant moment. There's Baraka. Proud man. And then heading back down. Now, you go this day from 19,000 feet all the way back down to your high dry camp, sleep for an hour, break camp, and head all the way down to 10,000 feet. So it's 3,500 feet up, 10,000 feet down, or 9,000 feet down, all in one day. It is a brutal day. I think you can see from Oliver and Adam's face just how brutal that day is. You spend the night kind of on the edge of the woods, and then you have this nice, beautiful walk down through those spectacular woods. I remember I was walking along, and all of a sudden, plop, something dropped right on the ground in front of me. It was a chameleon. Luckily I have my old 50 millimeter manual focus, or 55 millimeter 2.8 micro Nikkor lens, the old macro manual focus AIS lens. And I shot some of the just little beautiful details in the forest floor. And then it was time to celebrate. Here we are with having a nice dinner in Arusha, celebrating having made the climb with our guides and their families. And then that group, we were tight. We bonded through that trip. We hired a safari guide, went out into Serengeti, Ngorongoro, did some safari work. If you go to Africa, I would advise you to climb. This is Lake Manyara. Lake Manyara is a beautiful park with everything concentrated in it. Serengeti. I would advise, go on safari. If you have the energy to climb Meru, Mount Meru instead of Kilimanjaro. Have the views of Kilimanjaro. Meru is a soulful experience. If you have to climb the highest peak in Africa, it's an epic journey. Here's our ranger while we were setting up a tent camp in Serengeti. It's not for fear of other people with the rifle. It's for fear of wild animals, just to scare them off while you get your tent set up and your fire going if you're tent camping in Serengeti, and then the ranger goes back to the station. But the Serengeti's amazing. The migration's just incredible to witness. It's 360-degree view with just wildlife like that. There's our safari vehicle and Oliver and Adam and Genevieve, and you can see I've got my Wimberley sidekick mounted on my Arca Swiss ball head back in the day before I discovered the fluid head and gimbals. We had some beautiful wildlife that we saw. There's one of the world's biggest giraffes. It just must be. Rock hydrax. Giant old bull elephant there. A Maasai village. We went in and visited. It's a bit of a tourist trap, but it's still beautiful and amazing to see the traditional ways that people lived. And I cannot recommend highly enough, if you're doing sort of the Tanzanian southern tour, go and spend time in Ngorongoro crater. It is spectacular and beautiful, and really was my favorite place that I visited on safari. Next time I go and take the kids, I'll go to the Okavango Delta, but Ngorongoro is incredible. Cape Buffalo. This is down in the crater. All the wildlife just concentrated in there. You will not fail to see things. Tarangire National Park, giraffe and elephant. I know this is not the sharpest photo. I'd love to go back and take it again. But the thing that I love about this is the idea that these giraffe congregate to drink. And the only time that they're susceptible to predators is when they're down splayed like this drinking. And so they come in a group and they all stand watching in 360 degrees to watch for predators while they take turns drinking to be safe. Lake Manyara again, just a beautiful, beautiful place. And then that whole crew, my other goal was to go to Rwanda, and we figured out how to buy, local plane tickets from Arusha into Kigali, and we flew into Rwanda. We wanted to see the mountain gorillas and got a bus from Kigali up into Rungari and hired local guides and paid the fees and hiked through the thickest jungle in the Rwandan volcanoes on the border of Rwanda and Congo, and hacked our way through stinging nettles. I mean, you have no idea, these giant stinging nettles, that's what these bushes are right here. And if you bump one, you're like, ow, ah, through mud. The biggest earthworms I've ever seen in my entire life. And then your guides are working with radios with the people who protect these groups of acclimatized gorillas. And people come in for 1 hour a day for each group. They limit it to, at least back in the day, they limited it to 10 people for 1 hour. And these people protect them from poachers. They're constantly sort of with the group, protecting them from poachers. And spending an hour with the mountain gorillas in Rwanda or Uganda it's an experience you'll never, ever, ever in your life forget. It's moving, it's changing. This is the silverback of this group that we went in to see, and he sadly had lost a hand to a poacher's snare, so we only have one hand. Beautiful. He was so gentle, I'm glad, because he was like 500 pounds. But they're an amazing, amazing thing to visit. And then if you're traveling down in Tanzania and Kenya, going over to Zanzibar is an experience I just can't recommend more. The city's beautiful. It was the spice capital of the world. You can hire sailing ships and go out in this spectacular reefs and perfectly clear water. It's affordable. It's beautiful. This is nutmeg in its native form in a bazaar in their old city stone town. This is a place called Fubu where you can go and rent boats and just travel. And this is low tide. When the tide comes in, all the boats float. And the water is amazing, and the scenery is spectacular. And inside, in the inner part of the island, there's amazing wildlife like these highly endangered red colobus monkeys and crazy little frogs and all kinds of rainforest creatures. And the traffic on the island is unlike anything you'll experience anywhere else. I met an amazing, amazing character there who I can't wait to see again, Babu. He's known as Pweza, which means octopus, and he's just this incredible guy in Zanzibar. Who runs tourism and rents cars and scooters and gets people on trips. Really the greatest thing about Africa, if you open yourself to it, and if you go and you're just willing to meet people and be open, is that the people are just incredible. And the children in particular. I had so much fun taking pictures of children and interacting with them. Now I would absolutely take a mini printer with me so that I could leave kids with photos of themselves. They loved seeing pictures on the back of my digital camera and being photographed and just playing. Here's in Rwanda. One of the things that happened to me in Rwanda that was just incredibly moving and I'll never forget was meeting up with this group of boys. And they told me that they were from the English school, and one of them had this perfect English with an amazing British accent, and they were a soccer club, and they were playing with this ball that was half full of air, and they said, "Oh, it leaks." And I went to a little store and I bought them it wasn't a new soccer ball, but it held air. It was the only soccer ball the little store had. And they were so ripping excited they put on a match for me. So I can't rave enough about an adventure in Africa. And if you have the gumption, literally going there and meeting people on the ground, if you can make a couple of connections, you can do, if you can leave yourself flexible. If you have that flexibility, this was one of the most amazing trips of my life. It was one of the biggest adventures. Just going with a hotel room for the first night, I came home with a whole bundle of friends that'll last a lifetime, and photos, and just an amazing story to tell. And I couldn't wait to get back. And I did go back, and I've had subsequent trips to Africa. And now I'm raising my family, and they're really small. But as soon as they're big enough, I can't wait to go back and share how spectacular, wild, friendly, and alive that continent is. Oh wow, I almost completely forgot. I told you that I was going to go in and re-edit that file that I did way back in 2013. And here I've got the two flagged images. I think I flagged this one because I thought, man, I want to stand on top of Mount Meru, which I went back several years later and did, and I can't recommend that trip highly enough. But this one in the Great Barranco Valley with the giant Senecio and Blue Hour with Kilimanjaro and the snows on the top of Kilimanjaro, this is really my favorite, I think, landscape shot of the trip. And so I'm gonna open up my panels here in Photoshop Lightroom Classic. I'm here in the library. I'm going to go into Develop, and in Develop I'm going to close down my film strip so I have a nice bigger view of my image. I'm going to keep that left panel open and nice and wide so that I can, click on it so that I can see my sliders. If your panel's short like this, stretch it out to where you get a little bit longer panels. And the first thing, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to open this up. I'm going to create a virtual copy. So I'm going to hit, I could right click the image and say create virtual copy. I could also just hit the control or the command on Apple plus apostrophe key. And that's going to create a virtual copy. That way we can bounce back and see what the original looked like. And then I want to convert it because this is in an older Adobe Camera Raw process version. I'm going to update this to the latest processing version because that's going to change the whole sliders and dynamics of this image. And I don't want to be adjusting clarity or saturation at the raw processing level or contrast here. I'm just going to kind of undo that. That's something I might have done way back in the days that I was first editing this image. So let's just have a look at the raw data of it. I'm just sort of resetting everything here. And I'm going to turn on my white clipping mask and my black clipping mask to see, the right side of this histogram is pure white, the left side is pure black, and it shows me the color distribution within. And I'm editing to this histogram, just like I shoot to this histogram. Now, remember, this is 13 years ago, so don't judge my shooting style. I think I used a graduated neutral density filter, which is why the top half of this image is so much darker than the bottom half. I would never do that today. I would shoot it bracketed. But at any rate, I did it at the time. I'm going to pull my blacks down to where I see just a little bit of this blue here. That shows me black shadows or clipping. I don't mind having a little bit of black. I don't want to blow the highlights though. I'm going to pull those back on those snowfields. This looks like a bit of trash to me. I'm going to probably delete that anyway. I'm going to pull my highlights down just a little bit. And I might actually try to counteract that graduated filter that I did out in the field. I'm going to actually just kind of reset everything. I'm going to hold the Option key down here, and I'm just going to go through. I can double click each setting here so that I don't have any of these settings moving. And I'm going to bump exposure up just a bit so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to drop this graduated filter in here to kind of counteract the actual glass graduated filter that I did in the field. I'm kind of undoing what I consider to be a mistake in the age of modern digital. And I don't necessarily want to just apply it straight up like this. I might back the whites off a little bit. and back the highlights off. I'm just really wanting to boost shadows to kind of counteract that graduated filter. There you go. Boost exposure a little bit, and that's just a little bit more evenly processed, so it counteracts a little bit. All right. Now looking at the global image as a whole, I might boost my shadows just a smidge, kind of brighten those up. Big dramatic movements are what I like to do, you know, and then sort of stop where I'm happy. It's a pretty massive boost to the shadows. Contrast, I might even just boost global exposure a wee bit. Not too much, just a wee bit like that. Yeah, that's looking better to me. And then one thing I want to do, I want to grab my dust and scratch removal tool, my little kind of local tool, and I'm going to shrink that brush. And I just want to come over this piece of trash here that's bugging me and just zap it. And I can actually move that tool. This is a section of the ground that looks a lot like the section that I'm working with. I'm just going to move it. You see, this is the part I click. This is the part that it's kind of cloning and blending in. And then when I click off, I just want to have a look. That looks really good. Never noticed that that was changed. You know, I might go in and fine-tune that a little bit more even yet if I wasn't doing a video right now, but it's pretty darn close. I'm pretty happy with that. All right, so that's a better raw processed image. You know, after doing that little exposure burst, I might jump back in here just a little bit, pull my exposure down just a smidge to rebalance it a little because I boosted global exposure a bit. That looks really good to me. All right, then I'm gonna go in and use OM1 to finish edit this image. You know, I tend to organize and raw process in Lightroom and then go in and I love to finish edit in OM1 effects. I'm going to create a copy with Lightroom adjustments. It's going to be a PSD. I'd like to use ProPhoto RGB, the widest color gamut space that I can work in, 16 bits to be a nice wide image I'm not doing any clipping on. It's opening up and creating a brand new PSD file in a really wide color space at 16 bits to edit in. It's opening it in Photo RAW 2021, effects, and I've got a whole bunch of presets in here. This feels like a bit of a wintry scene to me with snow and the blue in it. I have a number of 4-season presets I like to work with that are just a starting point for me in my editing process. I'm going to go into my winter presets. I have 10 presets in there. I'm going to click on that little symbol, that's the quick view browser, and I can press the plus key to get a bigger view of what these presets look like on my image. So I've got blue hour, I've got dawn light, looks really good. Ice blue looks nice to me. Misty mountains is nice. It is kind of a misty mountain scene. This is a kind of creative effect where I add a snowstorm. I don't think we need that. Stormfront's not bad. Winter sunset. I'm gonna go with misty mountains. I'll click on that. It adds a vignette. I don't think I want a vignette. I think that the graduated filter was already doing more than I wanted. This isn't a scene where I feel like I need a vignette. There's a little natural vignette going with the fog and the cloud and the black of the foreground rocks. I've got a color enhancer in here that's really darkening the sky and adding some saturation in on the sky. We'll probably adjust that. I like to turn off each of these filters. If you click on each one, you can go in and control all the settings in it. We'll tweak each one from the bottom to the top. A dynamic contrast filter, that's adding local contrast and sort of pop and sharpening. So if I turn that on and off, you see it just gives it a little pop. We'll turn that off for now. And we'll go in and look at the bottom filter I've added here, which darkens the highlights. It's boosting shadows, it's dropping the whites a little bit in the scene, reducing the blacks a little bit. You can see it adjusting the histogram up here as I make these moves. It's adding a bit of contrast. If I turn it off, turn it back on, it's just adding a little pop to the scene the way I've got it adjusted. I think it looks really nice. Close that down. Dynamic contrast is really going to add sharpening, micro contrast. You can go in and control whether it's being added to the small details in your scene, the medium details in the scene, the big chunky edges like the difference between the sky and the mountains. You know, for example, if I pull those big edges, you'll see it really starts to get crunchy in the big, easy to see edges in the scene. I'll hit Control Z, that'd be Command Z on the Mac to undo that move. Small details is the really fine little details. You can see how that's affecting those small details in the scene. It's pretty cool how that works. I'll undo that as well. Control Z is always undo. I like what this is doing. And then the color enhancer. I think that's making the sky too dark. So I can jump in here. It has some global color adjustment stuff that you can do. And you can see that in the blue channel, I've really darkened it. I want to bring that up. I don't think I want to saturate it quite as much. Let's have a look in the oranges. That's this kind of part of the mountain there. We're pulling those a little to red, saturating those a bit. We might brighten those a little bit, just a touch. Looks really, really good. Now, finally, one thing I might want to do in here, I love the way that Photo RAW does local adjustments. So I'm going to come in here to local adjustments. I'm going to choose that I want to lighten my scene. By clicking lighten, it just boosts exposure. And what I get here is not exactly what I'm going to want. I'm going to do a little dodging. I'm going to just brighten the green parts, the vegetation in these giant senecio trees. I want to make sure my opacity is not too bright. I'm going to paint it at about a 25% opacity. I want my feather to be at 100%. That's how hard an edge does my brush have. I don't want to see the edge. You know, if I go in and I paint at a hard edge and I'm darkening, you'll see how, or lightening, you'll see how that has just a nice hard edge. Instead, I want to have a nice soft edge, feather that in. You see now as I move, it's more like a spray paint can. And what I'm going to do is just reduce my brush size, and I just want to go in and paint each of these little bits of vegetation. Just real gentle, soft brush edge, 25%. I'm not doing anything major. I'll adjust my brush size, and the way I'm adjusting my brush size is by just touching the bracket. Right bracket key makes my brush a little bigger. Left bracket key makes my brush a little smaller, and I'm just kind of controlling those size controls with the bracketing keys as I go in and just paint the green parts of the scene just a little bit brighter. And I don't like the effect as I'm doing it right now. Trust me, it's not the final thing I'm doing. But having it just globally adjust your exposure right now is an easy way to see as you paint it in. So just like I said, 25% boosting there. Now I want to turn that way down. I barely want to be changing the exposure at all, but I would like to boost the shadows a little bit and maybe the midtones a touch. I could actually pull highlights back a little bit, create more contrast in those. Now when I turn it off and I turn it back on, it's just making that stand out a little bit. You never know. It's super subtle. Certainly never know I was in there doing that, but you see the killer aspect is I can go in and control all those kind of developed controls on a mask, and as you look at it, you can see the gray areas where I just kind of painted that in. I could even copy that and apply it to another mask for another adjustment. I think that's just about right. If we go in and we look at how we had it in Lightroom and how we just took it in Photo RAW, it gives it that extra pop, it gives it that extra color, gives it that extra kind of boost. You know, it might almost be too much. Well, here's the beauty. I can actually go back in effects and fade all the effects I just did in and say, well, you know what? I feel like it's a little overdone. I'm just going to back it off. The global blend of what I did on my effects stack with all these filters and just back it off a little bit. So then if I look at it, preview it, it's subtle, but it makes a difference. So that's the beauty of working in RAW, whether you're, 10 years later, 13 years later, you can update that photo to the latest process and bring it into whatever software you like to work with to finish edit, reprocess it, and all of a sudden, we come back here into Lightroom, it round trips me back in, and if I pull this open, you can see there's the original file that we worked on. Really looks kind of garish to me now. And the newly processed version that's way more natural feeling to me, and yet pops in a way that the original edit 13 years ago didn't. So, cool stuff. All right, so I hope you all enjoyed that little adventure, that modern edit of an older image. I really think that those travel adventures they fuel me personally. They fuel my family as a whole. You know, I have to have a trip that I'm looking forward to. It's one of the things that's been so challenging about this last year is not having enough travel and adventure to look forward to. You know, it just fuels my soul. And personally, I just love the people that I meet along the way. And Africa's a place I cannot wait to get back to. All right, so speaking of that, I'm traveling out this week, meeting with my great friend Rick LePage, and we're going to do some long exposure night photography along the John Day River near Wasco in sort of the north central part of Oregon. It's going to be freezing cold. We're planning to film some content, so I'll be sharing some of that with you all. And when I get back, it's supposed to snow in Portland. I'm kind of crossing my fingers. My kids are excited. But before I sign off, I want to talk a little bit, as promised, about this kind of crazy killer tabletop tripod I've been using from Leofoto. I showed it a couple of weeks ago, and the overarching question that I had from people was, you know, what kind of a head is sitting on top of that? Now, I just showed you flipping it over, sort of ball head style. Obviously, that throws the camera out off its weight position. If I let go, there's too much weight. That's one reason why I love L brackets. You know, let's say I'm using this guy which has its Arca Swiss clamp, and I got my L bracket. Well, I can stay centered over this tabletop tripod just by clamping in and keeping my camera centered over the top. It's a little bit light. Well, one of the great things about this tabletop tripod is it has clickable positions with its legs, just like a larger tripod, and you can get down low and get distributed out so that it balances that weight. Now, granted, I have the Z7 II here with the 14 to 24 2.8 S and a UV filter hanging off the front of it, so there's a lot of weight there. So the MT-02 set of legs is really, really awesome. You know, it gives you that latitude that any kind of, that a small set of legs, a tabletop set of legs, I find that it's just better built than any other ones that I've used, and a really nice thing. But the question that I got from a lot of people was, what is that ball head that's sitting atop it? And that is an LH25. Leofoto also makes this. It has a single lever that nice, big, easy to move, quarter turn locks or unlocks, and it locks the ball. It also, if you turn it loose, it'll let you rotate, it'll let you pan, and if you lock it, it locks both. And if you lock it and spin it off, it's just a really small, nice, lightweight, high precision little ball head. So I got a lot of questions from people that maybe have a tabletop tripod, but they don't have such a nice little ball head to go on the top of it. I haven't found either a better tabletop tripod than this Leofoto MT-02 or a better ball head to go atop it than the LH25. So it's pretty cool. Comes with this Arca clamp. I dig it. If you bring your legs in, click stops, just like a modern top of the line tripod, multiple stops. So you can get narrow, medium, or really wide. It's just a great little system. Another thing I have to report, I talked about how the Unleashed from Foolography works with the Z6 II and Z7 II. I was out doing some long exposure photography, and I had this linked in to my Z7 II. And it works, it triggers the camera, everything's perfect, except when you go to play and use menus on the back of the camera. Unfortunately, Nikon has kind of changed their software system a little bit, and it treats this as if you're using a tethered capture method. And so you have a really hard time previewing images and playing images on the back LCD of the camera or in the viewfinder if you're using it to capture from the app with your phone. And I've talked to the folks in Germany, the Foolography people, and they are working and have already created a beta that I'm testing that's working with iOS. So they'll have that out really soon on the iOS Unleashed app. And Android will be right after that. They are guaranteeing me they'll have a fix for it, and they have Nikon's SDK to do that with. They don't have a Z6 II or a Z7 II in their hands, but they're supposed to have one next week, and I'm testing it for them. So very, very soon, this will be fully functional with the Z6 II or Z7 II. But if you haven't unleashed and you're experiencing any problems with, playing back your images on the back screen of the camera after capturing them with the app, say you're doing long exposures, you're not alone. It's just a change in the way the camera's software is working, and they are about to update. So, if you have any problems with it, keep me posted. I'll let you know when they have it dialed and it's working. It should be really, really soon. They're a great company. They're fun to work with, and they were super active. They literally within a couple days had me an iOS version that addressed it. So, all right, I'll keep you posted. I hope everybody out there is staying creative, staying safe. We've come so far through this crazy last year plus. Hold on a little bit longer, and I'm sure we will all be out being creative together. Thanks, everybody, for staying tuned. Remember, we have an office hours coming. I think it's February 16th, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a week from Tuesday. And it's going to be all about portrait photography, lighting, environmental portraiture versus headshot photography, and looking at some of the greats of portraiture photography, taking your questions about portraiture photography or anything else that's free. You can sign up for Zoom or you can sign up for YouTube. I hope to see you there, hudsonhenry.com/office hours. Again, I'm adding workshops for the latter half of this year and the beginning of next year. Check it out, hudsonhenry.com/workshops. Stay safe, stay creative. We'll see you next week.